You scroll through social media every day, watching people your age flash designer clothes, expensive cars, and luxury vacations. You hit the like button, maybe even leave a comment of admiration. But deep down, something feels hollow about it all. You know these same people are drowning in debt, chasing the next purchase that will finally make them feel successful. And if you're honest with yourself, you felt that same emptiness when you tried to follow their path. I am Solomon, and 3,000 years ago, I became the wealthiest man who ever lived. But here's what nobody tells you about my story. My riches didn't come from copying other rich people. They didn't come from flashy displays or impulsive decisions. They came from something so simple that modern society has completely forgotten it. Something that transformed a young, inexperienced king into the wisest ruler in history. I learned to listen before I acted. While everyone around me was shouting their opinions and chasing quick wins, I opened my ears to wisdom that others ignored. And that single ability multiplied my wealth, my influence, and my peace beyond anything the richest people today could imagine. Today, you're going to discover why imitating modern millionaires is keeping you broke and frustrated. More importantly, you're going to learn the ancient art that turns ordinary people into genuinely prosperous ones. Not the kind of prosperity that crumbles when the economy shifts, but the kind that builds generational wealth and unshakable confidence. This isn't about positive thinking or motivation. This is about fundamentally changing who you are from someone who reacts to someone who responds with wisdom, from someone who follows trends to someone who creates lasting value, from someone who seeks attention to someone who commands genuine respect. The moment you master what I'm about to share, you'll stop envying others and start becoming the person others look up to. Your financial decisions will carry weight. Your relationships will deepen. Your sense of purpose will become crystal clear. But I need you to understand something. This ancient wisdom works only for those who are ready to abandon the shallow pursuit of looking rich and commit to actually becoming wealthy in every sense of the word. If you're ready for that transformation, if you're tired of the endless cycle of wanting what others have, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because what you're about to learn will separate you from 99% of people who will spend their entire lives chasing shadows instead of building substance. The richest man in history is about to teach you the one skill that changed everything. And it starts with learning how to truly listen. Number 1, the illusion of today's rich. You see them everywhere. The influencers with their rented Lamborghinis, the entrepreneurs flashing gold watches they bought on credit, the motivational speakers selling courses from their leased mansions. You watch their videos, scroll through their posts, and somewhere deep inside, you feel that familiar sting of comparison. Why don't you have what they have? Why does success seem so effortless for them while you struggle to make ends meet? But what if I told you that 90% of what you're seeing is nothing more than an elaborate theater performance? What if the very people you're trying to emulate are drowning in the exact opposite of what they're selling you? I am Solomon, and I've watched empires rise and fall. I've seen the difference between true wealth and its counterfeit, and what passes for prosperity in your modern world would have been laughed at in my courts. Because real wealth, genuine abundance, doesn't need to announce itself every 5 minutes on a screen. It doesn't require constant validation from strangers. It doesn't crumble the moment the spotlight turns away. The truth about today's rich is more devastating than you imagine. They are prisoners of their own image, slaves to a lifestyle they can't actually afford. They wake up every morning in a panic, wondering how they'll maintain the illusion for another day. Their bank accounts are empty, their credit cards maxed out, their sleep stolen by the anxiety of keeping up appearances. They are rich in likes, poor in substance. They are wealthy in followers, bankrupt in wisdom. Consider the modern entrepreneur who posts daily about his 7-figure business. He films himself in expensive restaurants, shows off his designer clothes, talks about his multiple properties. But behind the camera, he hasn't paid himself a salary in months. His business is bleeding money. He's borrowed against everything he owns. He's one failed launch away from losing it all. Yet he continues the performance because his entire identity depends on maintaining this facade. He has confused revenue with profit, visibility with value, noise with accomplishment. This is the great deception of your generation. You have mistaken appearance for reality, theater for truth. You have allowed people who are playing rich to teach you about wealth. It's like learning to swim from someone who is drowning while wearing a life vest for show. They look like they're floating, but they're going under just like everyone else. I want you to understand something that will change how you see every rich person you encounter from this moment forward. True wealth whispers. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need constant documentation. It doesn't require an audience to validate its existence. The truly wealthy person doesn't post their bank statements on social media. They don't film themselves counting money. They don't need to convince anyone of their success, because their results speak louder than any words ever could. But why does this illusion persist? Why do so many people continue to follow these hollow models of success? Because the truth about building real wealth is uncomfortable. It requires patience when everyone wants instant gratification. It demands humility when everyone craves recognition. It calls for wisdom when everyone is selling quick fixes. The genuine path to prosperity doesn't make for viral content because it's quiet, steady, and boring to watch. The fake rich are performing wealth. The truly wealthy are building it in silence. The fake rich are spending tomorrow's money today. The truly wealthy are investing today's money for tomorrow's freedom. The fake rich are chasing trends. The truly wealthy are creating value that outlasts any trend. The fake rich are working for applause. The truly wealthy are working for legacy. I've seen this pattern repeat throughout history. In my time, there were always those who wore the finest robes they couldn't afford, who hosted lavish feasts with borrowed gold, who spoke loudly of their riches while privately counting their debts. They were the first to fall when hardship came. They were the first to beg when prosperity abandoned them. They built their lives on sand and wondered why the first storm washed everything away. The danger of following these fragile models isn't just financial. It's spiritual. When you pattern your life after people who are fundamentally dishonest about their circumstances, you begin to believe that deception is necessary for success. You start to think that if you just fake it long enough, you'll eventually make it. You convince yourself that image is more important than substance. And slowly, without realizing it, you become just another performer in this elaborate charade. But there's something even more insidious happening. These false models of wealth are stealing your attention from the real work that needs to be done. While you're busy trying to look successful, you're not actually becoming successful. While you're focused on the external markers of wealth, you're ignoring the internal development that creates wealth. While you're chasing their lifestyle, you're not building the skills, the character, the wisdom that would generate real abundance in your life. The truly wealthy person you should emulate is invisible to you. They're not on social media. They're not selling courses about getting rich quick. They're not at the flashy conferences promising to reveal the secret of success for just 3 easy payments. They're in their businesses, making decisions based on decades of experience. They're in their studies, reading and learning and growing. They're with their families, enjoying the peace that comes from genuine security. They're living quiet lives of extraordinary impact. This is your wake-up call. Every minute you spend admiring the fake rich is a minute stolen from building real wealth. Every dollar you spend trying to look successful is a dollar that could have been invested in actually becoming successful. Every ounce of energy you waste on maintaining appearances is energy that could have been channeled into creating something of lasting value. The path forward begins with a simple recognition. The people who are loudest about their wealth usually have the least of it. The people who are most eager to teach you about success usually have the least experience with it. The people who promise you can have everything they have are usually struggling to maintain what they claim to possess. Stop following the broken. Stop imitating the imitation. Stop building your dreams on someone else's lies. Because until you recognize the difference between real wealth and its counterfeit, you'll keep chasing mirages in the desert while the oasis of true abundance remains hidden from your sight. Number 2, Solomon, the king who knew how to listen. There's a moment in every person's life when they're offered a choice that will define everything that follows. For most people, this moment passes unrecognized, lost in the noise of daily concerns and immediate desires. But for those rare few who recognize it, who understand its weight, this moment becomes the foundation upon which empires are built. I am Solomon, and my moment came not when I inherited a throne, but when I was asked what I wanted most in all the world. Picture this scene. A young king, barely out of his youth, suddenly responsible for millions of people. The weight of a kingdom on shoulders that had never carried such burden. Advisors whispering in my ears about the threats surrounding us, the enemies gathering at our borders, the economic challenges that could destroy everything my father David had built. In that moment of overwhelming responsibility, when I felt smallest and most inadequate, the divine appeared to me in a dream and spoke words that would echo through eternity. Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Do you understand the magnitude of this offer? Imagine if someone with unlimited power approached you today and said you could have anything, absolutely anything, you desired. What would you ask for? Most people would ask for money. They would ask for power. They would ask for fame, for beauty, for the ability to control others, for protection from their enemies. They would ask for everything they believe would solve their immediate problems and fulfill their immediate desires. But I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I asked for wisdom. Not just any wisdom, but specifically the wisdom to listen, to discern, to understand what I was hearing before I acted on it. I asked for the ability to distinguish between truth and lies, between sound advice and flattery, between what serves the moment and what serves eternity. I asked for the capacity to hear not just with my ears, but with my heart, my mind, my spirit. And in that moment, everything changed. Not just for me, but for everyone whose life would be touched by the decisions I would make from that day forward. Because when you ask for the wisdom to listen, you're not just asking for a skill. You're asking for a complete transformation of how you engage with the world. You're asking to become a different kind of person entirely. Most people think leadership is about speaking. They believe authority comes from being heard. They assume power flows from the ability to command, to direct, to tell others what to do. But I learned something that day that very few leaders ever understand. True authority comes not from speaking, but from listening so well that when you finally do speak, everyone knows your words carry the weight of genuine wisdom. Before I asked for this gift, I was like every other young person thrust into responsibility. I thought I needed to have all the answers. I thought I needed to project confidence even when I felt confused. I thought admitting I needed guidance was a sign of weakness. I was wrong about everything. The moment I humbled myself to ask for the ability to listen, to truly hear and understand, I began to accumulate not just wealth, but the kind of deep, unshakable prosperity that outlasts kingdoms. The riches came, yes, but they came as a consequence, not as the goal. When you learn to listen with the kind of depth I'm describing, you begin to hear opportunities that others miss. You begin to understand the currents underneath the surface of every situation. You begin to recognize the difference between what people say they want and what they actually need. You begin to see patterns that are invisible to those who are too busy talking to pay attention. Every great decision I made as king began not with my speaking, but with my listening. When two women came to me, both claiming the same baby was theirs, I didn't start by announcing my judgment. I listened. I heard not just their words, but their hearts. I understood that one was speaking from love and the other from desperation. And only after I had truly heard them did I propose the solution that revealed the truth and became legendary for its wisdom. When foreign dignitaries came to establish trade relationships, I didn't begin by listing our kingdom's strengths or making demands. I listened to what they were really offering, what they truly needed, what fears they carried, what hopes they harbored. And because I heard them completely, I was able to craft agreements that made everyone prosper while establishing relationships that lasted generations. When merchants came with business propositions, I didn't evaluate them based on their promises or their enthusiasm. I listened for the soundness of their understanding, the depth of their experience, the honesty in their assessment of risks. I listened for what they weren't saying as much as for what they were. And this ability to hear beneath the surface allowed me to identify the partnerships that would multiply our wealth and avoid the ventures that would have cost us everything. But here's what most people don't understand about listening. It's not passive. It's not just sitting quietly while someone else talks. True listening is one of the most active, demanding, transformational things you can do. It requires you to set aside your ego, your preconceptions, your desire to be right. It demands that you become genuinely curious about perspectives that might challenge your own. It calls for the courage to hear things you might not want to hear. When I listened to the prophets, I didn't just hear their words of encouragement. I heard their warnings. I heard their challenges to my behavior. I heard truths that made me uncomfortable. And it was this willingness to hear difficult things that kept me aligned with wisdom and protected my kingdom from the consequences of unchecked power. When I listened to my counselors, I didn't just accept their advice at face value. I listened for the wisdom behind their words, but also for their limitations, their biases, their hidden agendas. I learned to synthesize multiple perspectives into decisions that were wiser than any single viewpoint could provide. When I listened to my people, I heard not just their complaints, but their dreams, not just their problems, but their potential, not just what they were saying in the moment, but what their hearts were crying out for across the generations. And this deep listening allowed me to build not just policies that worked, but a legacy that outlasted my lifetime. The spiritual authority that flowed from this gift of listening was unlike anything I had experienced or witnessed. When you truly listen to people, they sense it immediately. They feel seen, heard, understood in a way that most have never experienced. And this creates a bond, a trust, a willingness to follow that no amount of force or manipulation could ever achieve. But more than that, when you listen deeply and consistently, you begin to hear the voice of wisdom itself. You start to recognize patterns and principles that govern success and failure, prosperity and poverty, fulfillment and emptiness. You begin to understand the invisible laws that determine why some people flourish while others struggle, why some ventures succeed while others collapse, why some relationships thrive while others destroy everyone involved. This is why I became the richest man in history. Not because I asked for riches, but because I asked for the ability to listen my way to wisdom. And wisdom, true wisdom, always leads to abundance. Not just material abundance, but the kind of comprehensive prosperity that touches every area of life. The kind of wealth that doesn't diminish when you share it, but multiplies. The kind of success that doesn't require you to diminish others, but elevates everyone it touches. The young king who asked for listening ears became the wise king whose words are still studied 3,000 years later. Because when you learn to truly listen, you don't just change your own life. You become a conduit for wisdom that transforms everyone around you. Number 3, the spiritual power of listening. There are voices speaking to you right now that you cannot hear. Opportunities whispering your name that fall on deaf ears. Warnings crying out to protect you from disasters you're walking straight toward. Doors of possibility rattling on their hinges, waiting for someone who knows how to listen for the sound of opening. The tragedy of most lives isn't that these gifts aren't available. The tragedy is that people have forgotten how to receive them. I am Solomon, and I learned something that changed the entire trajectory of human history. Listening is not a passive act. It is the most powerful spiritual force available to anyone who desires to transcend their current limitations and step into genuine abundance. But the kind of listening I'm speaking about is nothing like what you've been taught. It's not about being polite when someone else is talking. It's not about waiting for your turn to speak. It's about opening yourself to receive wisdom from dimensions most people don't even know exist. When you truly listen, you activate something within yourself that most people never access in their entire lifetime. You become a receiver, a conduit, a vessel for intelligence that flows from sources beyond your own limited experience. You tap into the accumulated wisdom of everyone who has walked this path before you. You align yourself with patterns of success that have been proven across centuries and cultures. You position yourself to receive guidance that could save you decades of trial and error. But here's what you must understand. The world is designed to keep you from listening. Everything in your environment is engineered to fill your mind with noise, to keep your attention scattered, to make you reactive rather than receptive. The constant notifications, the endless stream of information, the pressure to respond immediately to everything, the cultural addiction to being busy, being productive, being constantly engaged. All of this is the enemy of the kind of listening that creates miracles. True listening requires silence. Not just external silence, though that helps, but internal silence. The ability to quiet the constant chatter in your mind, the running commentary on everything you encounter, the judgments and opinions and reactions that flood your consciousness every moment you're awake. When you can create this inner stillness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear things that were always there but were drowned out by the noise of your own thinking. I remember the first time I experienced this depth of listening. I was facing a decision that would affect thousands of people. The easy choice would have been popular but destructive. The wise choice would have been unpopular but beneficial. My advisors were divided. The people were demanding immediate action. The pressure was overwhelming. But instead of rushing to decide, I did something that seemed like weakness to everyone watching. I became still. I listened. And in that stillness, I began to hear voices I had never noticed before. I heard the voice of experience, drawing my attention to historical patterns that revealed the consequences of each choice. I heard the voice of compassion, showing me how each option would affect the most vulnerable in my kingdom. I heard the voice of wisdom, presenting alternatives I hadn't even considered. I heard the voice of truth, cutting through the deceptions and half-truths that had clouded my understanding. When I finally acted, it was with a certainty and authority that surprised even me. The decision I made not only solved the immediate problem, but prevented 3 other crises that no one else had seen coming. The people who had questioned my delay became advocates for my leadership. The advisors who had pushed for quick action admitted they had been wrong. And I learned something that would guide every important decision for the rest of my reign. Listening deeply before acting is not a sign of weakness. It is the source of power. But listening doesn't just give you better information for making decisions. It actually changes the quality of the opportunities that come your way. When you become known as someone who truly listens, who hears not just words but hearts, who understands not just what people are saying but what they mean, you become magnetic to the right kind of people and situations. Wise counselors seek out leaders who will actually hear their guidance. Profitable partnerships flow toward those who can listen their way to mutually beneficial arrangements. Investment opportunities present themselves to people who have the discernment to recognize value that others miss. Even wealth itself seems to flow more easily to those who can hear its whispers before it announces itself with fanfare. I've watched this principle work throughout history and across cultures. The merchant who listens carefully to his customers builds an empire while his competitors chase trends. The leader who listens deeply to her people creates movements that change the world while others create only temporary excitement. The investor who listens for market currents that others ignore builds generational wealth while speculators lose everything chasing noise. There's a spiritual law at work here that most people never discover. When you listen with genuine openness and humility, you align yourself with wisdom that is always seeking expression through willing vessels. This wisdom doesn't belong to you, but it will flow through you if you create the conditions for it to operate. It's looking for people who can receive it without corrupting it with their own agenda, who can act on it without taking credit for it, who can share it without diminishing its power. The most successful people in any field are almost always the best listeners in that field. They listen to their customers more carefully than their competitors do. They listen to market signals that others ignore. They listen to mentors while others are busy trying to prove how much they already know. They listen to feedback while others are defending their ego. They listen to their intuition while others are paralyzed by analysis. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of listening is its ability to reveal traps before you fall into them. When you learn to listen deeply, you develop an almost supernatural ability to hear the subtle warning signs that precede disaster. You hear the doubt in someone's voice when they're making promises they can't keep. You hear the desperation behind offers that seem too good to be true. You hear the instability in ventures that look solid on the surface. I've avoided more catastrophes through listening than I've created successes through action. The partnerships I didn't enter, the investments I didn't make, the people I didn't trust, the paths I didn't follow, all because something in the quality of my listening revealed hidden dangers that my reasoning mind had missed. This protective aspect of listening has saved me more wealth than most people ever accumulate. The person who speaks with authority is usually someone who has listened with humility. The person who acts with confidence is usually someone who has listened with care. The person whose words carry weight is usually someone who has spent more time listening than talking. Authority doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from having heard all the questions deeply enough to respond with wisdom. When you develop this capacity for deep listening, people sense something different about you. They trust you more quickly. They share their real concerns instead of just surface issues. They seek your counsel because they know you'll actually hear them. They want to do business with you because they feel understood. This creates a magnetic field around your life that draws opportunities, relationships, and resources that would never come to someone who is too busy talking to truly listen. But the ultimate power of listening is that it connects you to the source of all wisdom, all guidance, all provision. When you quiet yourself enough to hear beyond the noise of your own thoughts and desires, you begin to perceive the intelligence that governs all success, all prosperity, all fulfillment. You realize that you don't have to figure everything out on your own. You don't have to rely solely on your limited knowledge and experience. You can tap into wisdom that transcends any individual understanding. This is why those who listen more speak with greater authority. They're not just sharing their opinions or recycling information they've gathered. They're transmitting insights they've received from the deepest source of truth. Their words carry power because they emerge from silence. Their decisions create lasting results because they're rooted in wisdom that sees further than human calculation can reach. The spiritual power of listening is available to anyone willing to cultivate it, but it requires something most people are unwilling to give up. It requires the surrender of always being right, always having something to say, always being the center of attention. It requires the humility to acknowledge that the wisdom you need might come through the most unexpected sources. It requires the patience to wait for clarity instead of rushing to action. When you master this art, you don't just change your own life. You become a bridge between the wisdom that exists beyond human understanding and the world that desperately needs it. You become someone through whom solutions flow, through whom opportunities emerge, through whom healing and prosperity and understanding find expression. You become not just successful but significant, not just wealthy but wise, not just powerful but purposeful. Number 4, how to apply it in the modern world. Your phone buzzes. Another notification, another urgent email, another breaking news alert that feels like the world is ending, another social media update from someone who wants your immediate attention, and you respond. Of course you respond, because in your world speed is survival. Quick reactions are rewarded. Instant responses are expected. But in this race to react faster, to respond quicker, to stay ahead of the noise, you've lost the very thing that could transform your life completely. You've lost the ability to listen your way to wisdom. I am Solomon, and I'm going to show you how to reclaim this ancient power in a world that has forgotten its value. Because the principles that made me the wealthiest man in history aren't relics from a bygone era. They're eternal laws that work even more powerfully today, precisely because so few people are applying them. While everyone else is shouting, the person who learns to listen holds all the power. The first step is understanding that in your modern world, the ability to listen deeply is not just an advantage, it's a superpower. While your competitors are reacting to every market fluctuation, every trend, every piece of news, you can be the person who hears what's really happening beneath the surface. While others are making decisions based on panic or excitement, you can be making decisions based on wisdom that sees patterns they can't even perceive. But where do you begin in a world designed to destroy your capacity for deep listening? You begin by recognizing that not all voices deserve your attention. In fact, most voices in your environment are leading you away from wisdom, not toward it. The secret is learning to identify the sources worth listening to and having the discipline to ignore everything else. The right mentors are not the loudest voices in your industry. They're not the people with the most followers or the most impressive social media presence. They're not necessarily the youngest or the most energetic or the most charismatic. The right mentors are the people who have built something that lasted, who have faced the kind of challenges you're facing and emerged stronger, who have wisdom that comes from experience, not just theory. I want you to identify 3 people in your field who have achieved the kind of long-term success you desire, not flash-in-the-pan success, not get-rich-quick success, but sustained, substantial, meaningful success. Study their path. Read their books, listen to their interviews, but more importantly, if possible, find a way to listen to them personally. Ask them questions that go deeper than tactics and techniques. Ask them about their failures. Ask them about their decision-making process. Ask them what they wish they had known when they were where you are now. When you're in the presence of true wisdom, your job is not to impress them with how much you know. Your job is to empty your cup so it can be filled with something better than what you brought. Listen not just to their words, but to the principles behind their words. Listen not just to what they did, but to how they thought about what they did. Listen not just to their successes, but to the mindset that created those successes. But mentors are just one source of the wisdom available to you. Every situation you encounter is trying to teach you something. Every challenge you face carries information that could transform your approach. Every failure contains insights that could prevent future disasters. The question is whether you're listening for the lessons or just trying to move past the discomfort as quickly as possible. Before you make any significant decision, especially financial decisions, create a practice of listening that goes deeper than the immediate considerations. Don't just ask whether you can afford something. Ask whether it aligns with your deeper values and long-term vision. Don't just ask whether an opportunity looks good on paper. Ask what your intuition is telling you about the people involved, the timing, the hidden risks. I've watched too many people destroy their lives by making decisions too quickly. They see an investment opportunity that promises quick returns and they jump before they've listened to all the voices that should inform such a choice. They hear a business proposal that sounds exciting, and they commit before they've listened for the subtle warning signs that reveal hidden problems. They make major life changes based on emotions and impulses, instead of listening for the wisdom that comes from stillness and reflection. Create a practice of waiting, not procrastinating but waiting with intention. Before you say yes to any significant commitment, create space to listen. Sleep on it. Discuss it with wise counselors. Pay attention to how you feel about it when you're calm versus when you're excited. Notice whether the opportunity feels the same when you're not being pressured to decide immediately. The best decisions I ever made came after periods of careful listening. The worst decisions came when I allowed myself to be rushed into action without taking time to hear all the voices that should have influenced my choice. Speed is not always your friend. Sometimes the most profitable thing you can do is slow down long enough to make sure you're moving in the right direction. But listening in the modern world requires something most people have lost completely. It requires the ability to create and protect inner silence. Your mind is under constant assault from information, stimulation, distraction. Your nervous system is in a state of perpetual activation. Your attention is fragmented across dozens of different concerns and interests. In this state, you cannot hear the subtle wisdom that could guide you to breakthrough and abundance. You need to create spaces of silence in your day. Not just quiet, but actual silence. Times when you're not consuming information, not solving problems, not planning or worrying or analyzing. Times when you're simply present, simply open, simply available to receive whatever wisdom wants to emerge. This might be 5 minutes in the morning before you check your phone. It might be a walk without podcasts or music. It might be sitting quietly before you go to sleep, reviewing the day not with judgment but with curiosity about what you might have learned. The specific practice matters less than the consistency and the intention behind it. In these moments of silence, you're not trying to get somewhere or figure something out. You're creating space for insights to arise naturally. You're allowing your deeper wisdom to surface. You're opening yourself to perceive patterns and possibilities that your busy mind normally overlooks. You're practicing the art of receiving instead of constantly trying to produce or achieve or accomplish. But perhaps the most important application of listening in your modern world is learning to hear the signals that others miss. Every market, every industry, every area of opportunity is constantly sending signals about where it's heading. Most people are too busy reacting to current conditions to notice these early indicators of coming changes. The businesses that thrive over decades are usually run by people who heard market shifts before they became obvious to everyone else. The investors who build lasting wealth are usually those who heard opportunity knocking before the crowd arrived. The leaders who create lasting impact are usually those who heard their people's real needs before those needs became crises. Train yourself to listen for what's not being said as much as for what is being said. When someone presents you with an opportunity, listen for what they're not mentioning. When someone makes you a promise, listen for the confidence or doubt in their voice. When someone describes a situation, listen for the perspectives they're leaving out. This kind of listening takes practice, but it becomes a competitive advantage that compounds over time. The more you develop this skill, the more you begin to see patterns that others miss, opportunities that others overlook, risks that others walk into blindly. Your modern world is desperately hungry for people who can listen their way to wisdom and then act from that wisdom with courage and consistency. While everyone else is being driven by the latest trend, the most recent news, the current crisis, you can be the person who makes decisions based on deeper principles and longer-term thinking. While others are reacting, you can be responding. While others are being tossed around by every wind of change, you can be anchored in wisdom that transcends any temporary circumstance. The ancient art of listening is not just relevant in your modern world. It's more powerful than ever, precisely because it's so rare. In a world full of noise, the person who can hear what matters most will always have the advantage. Number 5, wealth that endures. Walk through any ancient city, and you'll see something that should terrify everyone chasing quick riches. The ruins of empires built by people who thought they were smarter than the principles that govern lasting success. Palaces that crumbled because they were built on pride rather than wisdom. Fortunes that vanished because they were accumulated through cleverness rather than character. Dynasties that collapsed because they prioritized speed over substance. These ruins are not accidents of history. They are the inevitable result of building wealth without the foundation that makes wealth endure. I am Solomon, and I want you to understand something that could save you from becoming another cautionary tale. The difference between wealth that lasts and wealth that disappears isn't found in the amount accumulated. It's found in how it was acquired and, more importantly, in the character of the person who accumulated it. Because true wealth is not just about having resources. It's about becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with resources. The kind of person who multiplies rather than squanders. The kind of person who builds rather than consumes. Every day, you watch people who seem to have everything lose it all overnight. Business empires that took decades to build destroyed by a single bad decision. Fortunes earned over generations lost in a moment of poor judgment. Reputations built over lifetimes shattered by one act of foolishness. And you wonder how this happens. How do people who seemed so successful become cautionary tales so quickly? The answer is always the same. They built their wealth on sand instead of rock. They accumulated resources faster than they developed the character to handle those resources. They focused on getting rich instead of becoming worthy of riches. They mastered the tactics of wealth creation, but ignored the principles that make wealth sustainable. And when the inevitable storms of life arrived, everything they had built was swept away because it had no solid foundation. But there is another kind of wealth, a kind of abundance that doesn't just survive challenges, but actually grows stronger through them. A kind of success that doesn't depend on perfect conditions, but creates value regardless of circumstances. A kind of prosperity that doesn't diminish when shared, but multiplies when given away. This is the wealth that comes from listening your way to wisdom before acting your way to riches. When you build wealth through listening, something fundamentally different happens in the process. Instead of just accumulating resources, you're developing discernment. Instead of just gathering money, you're cultivating judgment. Instead of just increasing your assets, you're strengthening your character. The wealth becomes secondary to the wisdom that created it, and that wisdom ensures the wealth will endure. Consider how most people approach building wealth today. They look for systems, strategies, shortcuts. They want to know the tactics that will produce results as quickly as possible. They study what successful people do without understanding who successful people are. They focus entirely on the external actions, while ignoring the internal transformation that makes those actions effective. And this is why most wealth disappears as quickly as it appears. But the person who learns to listen first develops something far more valuable than money. They develop the ability to hear opportunity when it whispers. They develop the discernment to recognize value that others overlook. They develop the patience to wait for the right moment instead of forcing the wrong timing. They develop relationships built on trust rather than transactions. They develop a reputation that becomes more valuable than any single asset they own. This foundation of wisdom creates a completely different relationship with wealth. Instead of being anxious about losing what you have, you become confident in your ability to create more if needed. Instead of hoarding resources out of fear, you invest generously knowing that wise investments always multiply. Instead of being defensive about your success, you become generous with your knowledge because you understand that teaching others doesn't diminish your own capacity. The wealthy person who built their fortune through listening makes fundamentally different decisions than the wealthy person who built their fortune through luck or aggression or market manipulation. When faced with a choice between short-term profit and long-term value, they choose value. When faced with a choice between personal gain and mutual benefit, they choose what serves everyone. When faced with a choice between what's easy and what's right, they choose what aligns with the principles that created their success in the first place. This isn't about being virtuous for the sake of virtue. This is about understanding that certain principles govern the creation and preservation of wealth, and violating those principles always leads to loss, regardless of how clever you think you're being. The person who cheats their way to wealth will eventually be cheated out of their wealth. The person who builds their fortune by exploiting others will eventually find themselves exploited. The person who accumulates resources through deception will eventually be deceived out of those resources. But the person who builds wealth through wisdom operates according to different laws. They understand that trust is more valuable than any contract. They know that reputation is worth more than any single transaction. They recognize that the quality of their relationships determines the quality of their opportunities. They build wealth that doesn't just grow but also gives back, doesn't just accumulate but also creates value for others. I've watched this pattern repeat across centuries and cultures. The merchants who became legendary weren't those who made the most money in a single deal. They were those who created systems of trade that benefited everyone involved and lasted for generations. The leaders who are remembered weren't those who accumulated the most power. They were those who used their influence to create prosperity that outlasted their own lifetimes. The builders who left legacies weren't those who constructed the most impressive monuments to themselves. They were those who created institutions and systems that continued to serve people long after they were gone. When you listen your way to wealth, you don't just build a business. You build something that can survive and thrive without your constant presence. You don't just accumulate assets. You create systems that continue generating value. You don't just make money. You develop the judgment and character that ensure you'll continue making wise decisions regardless of changing circumstances. This approach to wealth building requires something most people are unwilling to give. It requires the patience to grow slowly instead of rushing to get rich quick. It requires the humility to admit when you don't know something instead of pretending you have all the answers. It requires the discipline to do the right thing even when no one is watching. It requires the wisdom to think in decades instead of quarters, in generations instead of years. But the reward for this patient, principled approach is wealth that doesn't just survive challenges but becomes stronger through them. When markets crash, this kind of wealth finds opportunities that others miss. When industries change, this kind of wealth adapts because it's built on principles rather than tactics. When competition increases, this kind of wealth thrives because it's based on creating value rather than just capturing value. The man who listens builds empires, not sandcastles. He creates businesses that outlast him, relationships that honor him, systems that continue blessing others long after he's gone. His wealth doesn't disappear when he dies. It multiplies across generations because it was built on wisdom that transcends any individual lifetime. But there's something even more profound about wealth built through listening. It becomes a legacy that teaches others how to create their own abundance. Instead of just leaving money to his children, the wise, wealthy person leaves them the principles and character that created that money. Instead of just building monuments to his own success, he creates institutions that teach others how to succeed. Instead of just accumulating resources for his own benefit, he establishes systems that continue generating prosperity for others. This is why my wealth has endured for 3,000 years, not in the gold and silver that long ago returned to dust, but in the principles and wisdom that continue creating abundance for anyone who applies them. The temples I built crumbled, but the truths I learned while building them continue transforming lives. The riches I accumulated were eventually redistributed, but the insights I gained while accumulating them continue guiding people toward their own prosperity. True wealth, lasting wealth, eternal wealth is not measured in what you can accumulate, but in what you can create that continues blessing others long after you're gone. When you learn to listen your way to wisdom, you don't just change your own financial situation. You become part of a tradition of wisdom that has been creating abundance across cultures and centuries. You become someone through whom timeless principles find expression in contemporary circumstances. You become not just wealthy, but a source of wealth for others. This is the invitation before you, not just to get rich, but to become worthy of riches. Not just to accumulate resources, but to develop the character that can be trusted with resources. Not just to build wealth that serves you, but to create abundance that serves everyone it touches. The choice is yours, but choose carefully. Because the foundation you build today will determine whether your wealth becomes a lasting legacy or just another ruin in the graveyard of broken dreams. Right now, in this very moment, you stand at the same crossroads where I once stood as a young king. The voices around you are multiplying, each one promising a different path to the abundance you seek. The noise is overwhelming, the choices seem endless, and the pressure to act quickly feels unbearable. But I want you to feel something that most people never experience in their entire lifetime. The profound power that comes from choosing stillness in the midst of chaos. Picture a great oak tree that has weathered 1,000 storms. Its roots run so deep that no wind can uproot it, no drought can starve it, no season can diminish its strength. This tree doesn't grow because it fights the storm. It grows because it knows how to draw nourishment from sources others cannot reach. It listens to the earth, to the rain, to the rhythm of seasons that most never notice. You can become like this tree, not by shouting louder than the noise around you, but by developing roots that reach deeper than the surface chaos. Not by moving faster than everyone else, but by moving with the certainty that comes from hearing what others miss. Not by accumulating more things, but by becoming someone worthy of receiving what truly matters. The person you will become through this ancient practice of listening will surprise even you. Opportunities will find you instead of you chasing them. Wisdom will flow through you instead of you struggling for answers. Peace will surround you instead of you searching for it in external circumstances. Subscribe to continue walking this path with me, because what we've touched today is only the beginning of what becomes possible when you learn to listen with the ears of a king. The silence between these words holds more wealth than all the noise in your timeline combined.